In March 1994, the bodies of these 4 young women were discovered in a chillingly similar way. Each one had been brutally assaulted and strangled to death in their own homes, the very place they should have felt safe. When investigators finally tracked down their suspect, they uncovered a cold-blooded murderer who would go down in history as the first known African-American serial killer. And those 4 women? They were just the beginning.
Serial killer is shocking enough, but Bad Henry, as the show is called, profiles the man who's known as America's first African-American serial killer. He was accused in 90 killings, convicted of 9 right here in Charlotte. And wait until you hear the connection between all of his victims.
Between 1990 and 1994, at least 10 black women were found dead, all killed in the same horrifying way. But the police failed to connect the dots, whether it was carelessness or something worse. They let the bodies pile up while the killer kept hunting. In fact, he wasn't hiding. He was right there, even known to some of his victims. And it took 4 long years before he was finally caught. And it makes you wonder, if the police had done their job sooner, how many could have been saved?
The switch was flipped, and I just started choking, and just choking and choking and choking. And she passed out.
That man was Henry Louis Wallace, casually detailing how he ended the lives of his victims like it was nothing. But before we uncover why he did it and how he managed to stay undetected for so long, let's first get to know the women he was talking about, starting with Caroline Love. Caroline Love was 20 years old in the summer of 1992, working as a cashier at Bojangles. She had been at the job for more than 2 years, earning a reputation as a hardworking and reliable employee. Born and raised in Charlotte, she had always been driven. She ran track in junior high, graduated from Garinger High School, and later enrolled at Central Piedmont Community College to study nursing. By June of that year, Caroline Love was living with her best friend, Sadie McKnight, who also happened to be Henry's longtime girlfriend. They shared an apartment at Darby Terrace on Central Avenue, just a few blocks from the Bojangles restaurant where they both worked. On the night of June 15th, Caroline finished her shift and asked her manager to exchange a $10 bill for a roll of quarters so she could do laundry. He handed her the quarters, and she left the restaurant just after midnight. No one knew it then, but that was the last time anyone would ever see her alive. That night, Henry was already inside the apartment, waiting. He had a spare key and let himself in, knowing Sadie wasn't home yet. When Caroline walked through the door, he greeted her with a smile, acting like he belonged there. Then, without warning, he leaned in and kissed her on the cheek. Caroline was in complete shock, just like anyone would be in her shoes. It wasn't just that Henry kissed her, it was because he was her best friend's boyfriend. Trying to keep things from getting worse, she told him that as long as he never did it again, she'd let it go and wouldn't tell Sadie. But Henry wasn't about to take no for an answer. In an instant, his friendly demeanor vanished. Before Caroline could even process what was happening, he lunged at her, his hands tightening around her throat. She gasped, struggling to break free, but he was too strong. He forced her into her bedroom, pinned her down, and assaulted her. She fought back with everything she had, but her resistance only fueled his rage. Determined to silence her forever, he grabbed a curling iron, wrapped the cord around her neck, and pulled until she stopped breathing. At this point, Caroline was gone. Now he had to cover his tracks. He grabbed Caroline's bed sheets and quickly wrapped her lifeless body, then stuffed her inside a large orange trash bag. With no hesitation, he dragged her out of the apartment and into his car. But before leaving, he went back inside, scanning the room for anything he could take to make it seem like she had simply disappeared. That's when he spotted the roll of quarters she had gotten earlier that night. He grabbed it, locked the door behind him, and walked away as if nothing had happened. The night was dark and quiet as Henry drove through the streets, looking for a place where no one would find her. Eventually, he reached a secluded area. Without a second thought, he pulled over, dragged Caroline's body from the car, and dumped her into a ditch. Then, just like that, he got back in and drove away. Hours later, Sadie came home, completely unaware of the horror that had just unfolded in her apartment. Everything seemed normal at first until she got a call from Caroline's sister, Kathy. There was worry in her voice. She hadn't heard from Caroline all day, and when she called Bojangles, she learned that Caroline had never shown up for work. Caroline was responsible, always on time, so this was totally unlike her. At first, Sadie tried to stay calm, but as the minutes passed with no sign of Caroline, concern quickly turned into panic. Desperate for answers, she, Kathy, and even Henry went to the police station to file a missing person report, hoping someone could help them find her. When the police arrived at the apartment to investigate, it was immediately clear that something was off. Caroline's bedsheets were missing. The furniture looked like it had been moved, almost as if there had been a struggle. The roll of quarters she had gotten the night before had also vanished, yet there was no sign she had gone to do laundry. Her hamper was still full. But despite all the red flags, the case was treated as a simple missing person report. There was no real investigation, no deeper look into what had actually happened that night. Time passed, and eventually, people began to move on. At this point, Henry thought he was untouchable. He had already gotten away with Caroline's murder, and his violent urges were only growing stronger. But he wasn't some outcast, hiding away in the shadows. In fact, Henry had a decent social life. He was a well-liked manager at Taco Bell, where he built relationships with his employees. One of them was Shauna Hawk, a bright young woman juggling college and work, completely unaware that her boss was hiding a deadly secret. 7 months after Caroline vanished, on the afternoon of February 17, 1993, Henry showed up at Shauna's home. When she heard the doorbell, she had no reason to be suspicious. After all, it was just Henry. She let him in, and for about an hour they talked like normal co-workers. At one point, she even joked with him about the problems he was having with his girlfriend, Sadie. Everything seemed fine, but as their conversation wrapped up and Shauna walked Henry to the door, his entire demeanor changed in an instant. Without warning, Henry told Shauna he wanted to sleep with her. But it wasn't a suggestion. It was a demand. According to Henry, Shauna gave in, and they went to her bedroom. But after it was over, things took an even darker turn. He ordered her to get dressed and go into the bathroom. She complied, probably too scared to argue. But once she stepped inside, Henry followed, wrapping his hands around her throat. Just like Caroline, she fought back with everything she had, but Henry was just too strong. As soon as she lost consciousness, he filled the bathtub with water and placed her inside. Then, as if he had just finished running an errand, he took $50 from her purse and left, completely unfazed by what he had just done. By the time Shauna was found, it was too late. It's safe to say that the police investigation was a disaster. Despite questioning Shauna's friends and family, they came up with nothing. No real leads, no real suspects, just another young woman gone without justice. And Henry? He had no reason to be worried. A few days after the murder, Shauna's funeral was held, and in a sickening twist, Henry himself showed up to pay his respects. He stood among the mourners, pretending to grieve like everyone else. But no one was more devastated than Shauna's mother. She was the one who found her daughter lifeless in the bathtub, a moment that would haunt her forever. Her only child, gone in the most brutal way imaginable. She then wrote a public letter, pleading with the unknown killer to come forward, hoping that somehow her words might reach the monster who took her daughter away.
Dear killer, I am the mother of Shauna Denise Hawk. I'm writing to you because you murdered my only daughter in our home on February 19th, 1993, between the hours of 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. I find it so hard to believe that an entire year has gone by since that horrible Friday evening, when Shauna's dead body was discovered in the bathtub where you put her.
but Henry didn't care. In fact, this wouldn't be the last time he killed a coworker. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every week. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. Months after taking Shauna's life, he struck again, and this time his target was another one of his Taco Bell employees, a 24-year-old woman named Audrey Spain. Audrey had just returned home from a vacation, probably feeling relaxed and happy, completely unaware that a monster was about to enter her life. Just like before, Henry used his charm to talk his way inside. He made it seem casual, just a friendly visit. Nothing out of the ordinary. They sat down and had a conversation, just like he had done with Shauna. And just like before, Audrey had no reason to be afraid. But the moment she let her guard down, Henry flipped. Without hesitation, he grabbed her and forced her to the ground. This time, it wasn't just about control, it was about money. Henry was desperate for cash, and he demanded that Audrey give him the combination to the safe at Taco Bell. He needed money for crack, and his addiction had driven him to a new level of violence. But there was one problem. Audrey didn't know the combination. She told him over and over that she didn't have the answer he was looking for, but Henry didn't believe her. His frustration turned into pure rage, and his aggression escalated. The more she insisted she didn't know, the angrier he became. And then, just like before, his fury turned deadly. In his growing rage, Henry did what had now become second nature. He wrapped his hands around Audrey's throat and squeezed it until she passed out. Afterwards, Henry dragged Audrey to her bedroom and violated her just like what he did to Caroline and Shauna. Once he was finished, he strangled her to death, then calmly washed her body off in the shower, as if trying to erase the horror he had just inflicted. He placed her lifeless body on her bed, stole her credit card, and walked out as if nothing had happened. When Audrey's lifeless body was found 3 days later, an investigation was launched. But for reasons unknown, the police and detectives once again failed to connect the dots. The similarities were obvious. Both Shauna and Audrey were young women in their early 20s. Both were murdered in their homes, both worked at the same Taco Bell, and both were strangled. Yet somehow, this didn't raise any red flags, and because of this failure, Henry saw no reason to stop. His next target was 21-year-old college student Valencia Jumper. Valencia, a bright and ambitious young woman from Columbia, South Carolina, had a connection to Henry. She was friends with his sister. They had spent time together before, so when Henry showed up at her door, she had no reason to be suspicious. On August 10, 1993, Henry knocked on Valencia's door, spinning a familiar story. He told her that he had just had a terrible fight with his girlfriend, Sadie, and needed someone to talk to. Being kind and understanding, Valencia let him in without hesitation. Henry and Valencia had a long conversation. She was offering him some advice, talking to him about whatever was going on. But after they spoke for a while, Henry convinced Valencia to call Sadie and let her know where he was. When she got up to make the call, though, things took a dark turn. Henry's dangerous side, the one nobody saw coming, took over, and he switched to his true, violent nature. In a flash, he grabbed Valencia and put her in a chokehold. She struggled, but it didn't take long before she lost consciousness. When she was completely out, Henry dragged her to the bedroom, and that's where things went from bad to worse. He did things to her that no one should ever have to experience, and when he was done, he made sure she wouldn't wake up. He strangled her with a towel, but this time Henry didn't follow the same pattern as before. Instead of leaving her body in the bathtub like his previous victims, he did something far more twisted. He filled the bathtub with rum, not water. It was a strange and disturbing choice, but Henry wasn't done yet. He then took her body and placed it inside the tub. Once that was done, he casually walked to the kitchen, turned on the stove, and put a can of pork and beans on high heat. Before leaving the house, Henry made sure he covered every trace. He ripped the smoke detector off the ceiling, removed its batteries, and struck a match, setting it on fire. He made sure to leave behind no evidence of what he had done. The fire quickly grew, burning everything in its way. When Valencia's body was finally discovered, the flames had already done their work. The official report said she died from thermal burns. It seemed like just another tragic incident, but if anyone had taken a deeper look, they might have uncovered the truth because let's be real. A thorough investigation and a proper autopsy would have shown what Henry had done, but once again, the authorities failed. Another woman had been killed. Another crime scene was botched, and Henry walked away, free and unnoticed, ready to carry on his twisted ways. A few days after killing Valencia, Henry had the audacity to attend her funeral, standing among mourners as if he hadn't been the one responsible for her death. He even went with his sister, blending in with the grieving crowd. But Henry wasn't done. Just 5 weeks later, he struck again, this time targeting a mother. On September 15, 1993, Henry set his sights on Michelle Stinson, another co-worker from Taco Bell. That night, he went to her home, and when he arrived, Michelle welcomed him inside. The two of them sat and talked for a while, having what seemed like a normal conversation. By then, Michelle's kids were already fast asleep in their bedrooms, completely unaware of the nightmare that was about to unfold. As their conversation came to an end, Henry suddenly hugged Michelle and told her he wanted to be intimate with her. But Michelle wasn't interested. She told him she wasn't feeling well. That should have been the end of it, but as mentioned earlier, Henry wasn't willing to take no for an answer. Instead, he got angry and demanded to see all the medication she was supposedly taking. He searched for prescriptions but found nothing, and that was all it took for his frustration to explode. Right there, in the middle of the kitchen floor, Henry overpowered Michelle and took advantage of her, but that wasn't enough for him. When he was done, he tried to strangle her with a towel, just like he had done to Valencia. But Michelle fought with everything she had. She gasped for air, moaned in pain, and refused to let go of life so easily. Seeing that she was still struggling, Henry grabbed a large kitchen knife and stabbed her multiple times in the back. In the middle of this horrific attack, Michelle's 3-year-old son suddenly walked into the room. The innocent child had no idea what he was witnessing, but Henry quickly turned to him and ordered him to go back to bed. The boy obeyed, disappearing into his room while his mother lay bleeding on the floor. Once Henry was sure Michelle was dead, he grabbed the towel and the bloody knife, left the apartment, and threw both items over a nearby fence before disappearing into the night. The next morning, Michelle's children were the ones who found her lifeless body lying in the kitchen. Not long after, a friend stopped by to check on her. When they asked the little boy where his mother was, he simply said, "She's sleeping." He was too young to understand that she would never wake up again. And just like before, the police investigation into Michelle's murder was a disaster. Authorities failed to connect Henry to the crime. In fact, he wasn't even considered a suspect. By this point, 5 women had been murdered or gone missing, all within a 5-mile radius. Fear spread through the community. People were terrified, wondering if they would be next. In response, authorities increased police presence in East Charlotte. Now, sensing the pressure, Henry kept a lower profile for a while. But that didn't mean he stopped his crimes. He was still up to no good, committing smaller offenses while staying out of the spotlight. Early the following year, he fathered a child with a woman who wasn't his girlfriend. Then, on February 4th, 1994, he was arrested for shoplifting. The police detained him, gave him a court date, and let him go. But when the date came, Henry didn't show up. A warrant was issued for his arrest, but law enforcement barely made an effort to track him down. Once again, Henry slipped through the cracks. By now, he felt so untouchable, unlike never before. In his mind, he could do whatever he wanted and never face any consequences. And so, it wasn't long before he gave in to his darkest urges again. On February 20th, 1994, Henry knocked on the door of Vanessa Mack, a 25-year-old woman who happened to be the sister of one of his Taco Bell co-workers. He used the same manipulative tactics he had before. chatting casually, gaining her trust, and convincing her to let him inside. The moment she did, he turned violent. He dragged her to the bedroom, assaulted her, and then strangled her to death. Before leaving, he stole her bank card, thinking only about his next hit of crack cocaine. The next morning, Vanessa's mother found her daughter's lifeless body. As for the police investigation, well, it went exactly how you'd expect. Investigators failed once again. Vanessa was now the third murder victim connected to the same Taco Bell location, yet authorities still didn't see the pattern. By now, Henry was getting careless, too bold for his own good. His addiction to crack was spiraling out of control, and he was desperate for money. The following string of murders would unfold in just a short span of time. In fact, within a period of only 3 days, starting on March 8, 1994, Henry's killing spree would reach new levels of brutality. On March 8, 1994, Henry showed up at the apartment of his friend Bernice Woods. His real plan was to attack and rob Bernice's girlfriend, Brandy Henderson, but things didn't go as expected. When Henry knocked on the door, it was Bernice who answered instead of Brandy. Caught off guard, Henry quickly made up a story. He told Bernice that he was leaving town for a while and just wanted to say goodbye. After a short conversation, he left the apartment complex, but Henry wasn't done for the night. As he walked away, he remembered that another person he knew lived in the same complex. Betty Jean Bauckham, who worked as an assistant manager at Bojangles alongside his girlfriend, Sadie. Since Betty was in a position of authority, Henry assumed she knew the combination to the restaurant's safe. Seeing an opportunity, he went straight to her apartment and knocked on the door. When Betty answered, Henry told her he needed to use her phone. Without hesitation, Betty welcomed him inside. While she turned her back to him, Henry pretended to make a call, but the moment she was distracted, he dropped the phone, rushed up behind her, and put her in a chokehold. Betty struggled, but Henry's grip was too strong. He demanded that she give him the safe combination, the restaurant keys, and the alarm code, everything he needed to rob the Bojangles. Betty held out for about 30 minutes, refusing to cooperate, but eventually she gave in. The moment she told him the safe code, Henry loosened his grip and let her go. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of panicking or begging, Betty asked Henry what was wrong with him. In response, Henry admitted that he was sick. He told her he had hurt many people. But instead of reacting with fear, Betty did something incredibly brave. She forgave him. She even told him he needed to get help. But Henry didn't care. Her words meant nothing to him. The moment she finished speaking, Henry snapped. Just like so many before her, Betty suffered the same brutal fate. He dragged her to the bedroom, assaulted her, and then strangled her to death. Before leaving, he robbed her apartment, taking a TV, a VCR, a gold chain, and even her car. He drove straight to a pawn shop, sold everything, and used the money to buy crack. But his killing spree wasn't over yet. Just 12 hours later, Henry returned to the same apartment complex. This time, he was determined to finish what he had originally planned. He knew Bernice would be at work, which meant Brandy was home alone with her infant son. Once again, he knocked on the door, pretending he had something to drop off for Bernice. Trusting him, Brandy let him inside. As soon as she turned her back, Henry grabbed her in a chokehold and demanded money. But there was barely anything in the apartment, just a Pringles can filled with loose change. Clearly that wasn't enough for him, so he dragged Brandy to the bedroom, assaulted her, and then strangled her to death. Then something unexpected happened. The baby started crying uncontrollably. Henry tried giving the child a pacifier, but when that didn't work, he did something truly monstrous. He grabbed a towel and began strangling the baby. Eventually, the crying stopped. Before leaving, Henry wiped down the entire apartment, making sure to erase any fingerprints. He then stole Brandy's TV and stereo system and disappeared into the night, leaving behind another horrifying crime scene. Next, Henry pawned off both stolen items and used the money to buy more crack. Fortunately, Brandy's baby survived the attack, but by this time, the police were finally closing in on Henry. After the discovery of 2 murdered women in the same apartment complex, local authorities held a meeting. They compared the recent murders and quickly realized a chilling pattern. Each victim was somehow connected to one man, Henry Louis Wallace. In hindsight, these connections should have been made much sooner, but due to a lack of resources and urgency, law enforcement had failed to act. While police were piecing things together and preparing to arrest him, Henry was already hunting for his next victim. This time, he targeted Deborah Slaughter, a former co-worker of his girlfriend at Bojangles. Henry knew that Deborah used crack, and he planned to exploit this. When he arrived at her home, he tried to convince her to split the cost of drugs with him, but she refused. Frustrated, Henry asked for a drink. As soon as Deborah turned her back, he grabbed a towel and wrapped it around her neck. As she struggled, she did something shocking. She accused him of murdering Brandy Henderson and Betty Beckham, and instead of denying it, Henry responded by assaulting her. Then he started rummaging through her purse, looking for valuables. Knowing that Deborah kept a knife in her bag, Henry forced her to dump out the contents in front of him. As soon as the knife fell to the ground, he kicked it away and demanded all the money in her wallet. She handed over $40, but Deborah wasn't going down without a fight. In a moment of defiance, she smacked Henry across the face and started screaming for help. But Henry wasn't about to let her escape. He tightened the towel around her neck once again, forcing her to the ground before repeatedly stabbing her 38 times in the stomach and chest. Within moments, Deborah succumbed to her injuries. After robbing her, Henry used the stolen money to buy more crack, but later that night, he made a chilling move. He returned to her apartment to clean up the scene, just as he had done before. However, his reign of terror was finally coming to an end. The very next day, police arrested Henry Louis Wallace. Wallace denied everything at first. He tried to distance himself from the crimes, but the weight of the investigation was undeniable. Police had fingerprints linking him to a stolen vehicle, ATM footage of him using Vanessa's debit card, and eyewitness accounts placing him at the crime scenes. Under pressure, Wallace cracked. When asked to write down the names of his victims, detectives expected 4 names, 4 murders they had already connected to him. But as Wallace kept writing, their stomachs churned. The list was longer than they had feared. He was responsible for at least 11 murders, a horrifying revelation that transformed their investigation into one of the most chilling serial killer cases in North Carolina's history. To understand Henry Louis Wallace, we have to go back to where it all started. Born in Barnwell, South Carolina in 1965, Henry grew up in a small town with his mother and sister. His father left before he was born, and his mother was strict, controlling, and often cruel. She made sure Henry followed her every rule. But despite her efforts, Wallace wasn't a good student. He struggled in school, rarely stood out, and never showed signs of brilliance or violence. After high school, he bounced from job to job, served in the Navy, and eventually moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, in the early 1990s, where his killing spree would begin. Now, Henry's dark obsession with violence against women didn't start when he became a killer. It started much earlier, when he was just a boy. One day, young Henry witnessed a horrifying attack in the woods. A group of men assaulted a woman, and instead of feeling shock or fear, Henry later confessed that the scene excited him. That disturbing moment planted a seed in his mind, a twisted fascination that would later fuel his killing spree. In his confession, Wallace revealed that Caroline Love wasn't his first victim. In fact, his violent actions had started 2 years before her tragic death. His known victim was someone he had known for years, Tashonda Bethia, a high school student who had trusted him. Wallace had been quietly fixating on her, but no one around them had noticed the warning signs. One evening, he offered her a ride. She had no reason to feel unsafe. After all, she'd known him for a long time. But once inside the car, the situation changed. Wallace attacked her, took her life, and left her body in a pond, hoping no one would ever find out. For weeks, her loved ones searched for her, holding on to hope that she would return home. But that hope was shattered when her body was discovered in the water. Wallace was questioned by the police, but there wasn't enough evidence to connect him to the crime. And so, he walked free. After realizing how easy it was to get away with his crimes, Wallace continued his violent spree. But before he even took the life of Caroline Love, he had already claimed another victim. In May of 1992, he crossed paths with Sharon Nance, a 33-year-old woman who had lived a difficult life. She worked hard to survive, but that night, all she wanted was what she was owed. Wallace refused to pay, and when she stood up for herself, he reacted with brutal violence. He beat her mercilessly before leaving her lifeless body near the railroad tracks. Days later, she was found, but by then, Wallace was already moving on. For the next 2 years, he continued choosing victims, women he knew personally, women who trusted him. And all the while, no one realized a serial killer was living among them. 2 years after his arrest, Henry Louis Wallace finally faced trial in September of 1996. His defense team attempted to argue that Wallace suffered from mental illness and drug addiction, claiming that his use of crack cocaine impaired his judgment. While there was no denying that he had taken the lives of multiple women, his lawyers insisted that his crimes did not amount to first-degree murder. They claimed they were not premeditated acts, but rather impulsive violence driven by addiction. However, Wallace's own words betrayed him. His recorded confession revealed that in at least some of these cases, he had planned the murders ahead of time. He admitted to entering the homes of his victims with the intent to rob and kill them, contradicting the defense's argument. The trial lasted for 3 months, and on January 7, 1997, the jury reached a verdict. Henry Louis Wallace was convicted of the first-degree murder of 9 women. The sentence was clear: 9 death sentences, 1 for each life he had taken. On June 5, 1998, Henry Louis Wallace shocked the public once again, not with another crime, but with a wedding. Inside North Carolina's death row, just steps away from the state's execution chamber, Wallace married Rebecca Torrijos, a former prison nurse. The Mecklenburg County Public Defender, Isabel Day, acted as an official witness and even took photos of the ceremony. Also present was the manager of the death row unit, watching as a convicted serial killer exchanged vows. But Wallace wasn't focused only on his new marriage. He was also determined to escape his fate. Since being sentenced to death in 1997, he has made several appeals, arguing that his confessions were coerced and that his constitutional rights were violated. Despite his efforts, the North Carolina Supreme Court upheld his sentence in the year 2000. Then, in 2001, the United States Supreme Court denied his appeal, leaving him with little hope of overturning his punishment. By 2005, after another rejected appeal, it became clear that Wallace was running out of options. Today, Henry Louis Wallace remains on death row, awaiting execution. However, for the families of his victims, justice remains an elusive concept. While the legal system handed down its harshest sentence, nothing can ever undo the pain and loss that Wallace inflicted. The scars left behind by his crimes will never fully heal, no matter the punishment he receives. Now, I want to hear your thoughts on this. Do you think Henry got what he deserved? Or should he have been given the death penalty the moment he was arrested? If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.